My family and I are reading this book about boundaries, about setting boundaries in your life. Physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, spiritual boundaries, relationship boundaries, just about setting boundaries in your life. And the reason you set boundaries in your life is to basically, protect yourself, right? Create a safe place for yourself. And so as we're reading this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's so much valuable information in this. And I came across this YouTube video. It wasn't actually related to the book at all, but there's this martial artist, and he was talking about how it's important to set boundaries. And he was giving up this example, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is great advice. He says, for example, let's say you're at a gas station, and somebody starts to approach you. And maybe he's applying to young women, like we apply to anybody. He says, what you want to do is you want to create the boundary as soon as your spider senses start tingling, as soon as you feel it, right? We all know what we're talking about, right? That sense you feel. He says you want to create a boundary right then and there, because if you wait to allow the person to get all the way up to you to create a boundary, it is too late. They're going to do whatever they're going to do the moment they're there. He says the thing is, you do not know the intentions of the other person, and you will not know the intentions of the other person until you set the boundary. And that made me think, what does that mean by that? Well, here's what he was saying. He says, so if someone's approaching you, say, whoa, stop right there, all right? Maybe they're going to get close to your car, stop right there. And now, at this point in time, the person that's approaching you, they have two choices. They can either stop or they can cross that boundary. Now, if they stop and they're listening to you and they understand what you're saying and they're cognitive and sympathetic, they're going to stop, right? If they're not trying to do any harm, a decent person is going to stop, all right? But if they cross that boundary, then you know their intentions are not good, and then you can take whatever actions you need to take. But you got to set that boundary ahead of time so that way you can guide their actions, their behavior, and their intentions. So that's the way you protect yourself. And so the more I'm learning about these boundaries, the more we apply into our lives, my family's lives, it's really becoming very empowering. And the other part of it is this. Part of that is saying no, all right? Definitely applies to young ladies, applies to anybody. It's no. No is a boundary. And the sense I love is this, that they say this, no is a complete sentence on its own. You don't have to say no and explain. You don't have to. If this has to do with you and your safety and your comfortability and just that hedge of protection around you, no is all you got to say. You don't have to explain it. If the person's making you explain it, they're trying to cross that boundary, they're trying to get it beyond that, that gives you some insight upon their intentions. And so I started thinking about this, how does this apply to the classroom? And because the reality is we have to set boundaries for our students in our classroom. Then I thought, why do we set these boundaries? And I come to two conclusions on this. One is set of boundaries for ourselves to protect ourselves. I mean, that's basically what it is. This is my desk area. I do not cross the desk area because I have personal things here and everything else. You're setting that boundary there. You're setting the boundary as far as maybe profanity possibly because you're offended by the profanity, so there's no profanity in my classroom. Or maybe no cell phones because you don't want people taking pictures of stuff in your classroom or whatever. We set boundaries there to protect ourselves. But in the classroom, there's also another layer to it is we have a responsibility protecting the other students in the classroom. Because of our role, of the leadership role of us being the teacher in the classroom, we are now responsible for our own safety, responsible for the safety of the other students. And so we have to create those boundaries, those rules, those expectations, that limit, the threshold that students are not allowed to cross because it could impact somebody else. And so it becomes very important to set boundaries. So taking from that book, applying it to the classroom, something to keep in mind is how do you want your classroom to be? Because as much as we want to see every case successful, we do have responsibility to the class as a whole. So in my classroom, I've created certain boundaries, certain routines, certain procedures, certain things that I deem acceptable and not acceptable. Why? For the safety, protection, and the success of all of my students. So when it comes time to design your class, keep that in mind. Create those boundaries for yourself as well as for your students, so that way you can provide a safe and successful learning environment. Thank you for watching the video. If you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button or click on one of the other links.